Individual, Manager Waller.
Present.
Manager Wynant.
Here.
Manager Bradley.
Present.
Manager Wagaman.
Present.
And I am here. Is there anybody else in the audience that should be identified? Anybody, please state your name and who you're representing. Anybody in the audience?
Mark Stotts from the city of Centerville.
Okay, anybody else out there? Okay, we will go ahead and set the agenda. Anybody like to add or change the agenda today?
Staff have no changes.
Okay. And then we'll have to go ahead and approve that. Need a motion to
President,
approve.
I move we accept the agenda.
I second that.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call. Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wagaman.
Yes.
And Manager Priner, yes. Approval of the minutes.
Madam President, I move to approve the May 11th, 2020 workshop minutes. Second that, Bradley.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
President Reiner,
Yes.
I will note the 2 staff changes to the document that we'd like.
Okay.
Sorry for these to come late. Just the minutes should note that Teresa noted at the beginning of the meeting that remote participants had access to the meeting materials on the web link.
Okay.
And then also, we want to clarify the 2 women that were online from WSB. One was representing Circle Pines and the other, the city of Hugo.
Okay.
And we will make that addition.
Very good. Anything else on the workshop minutes? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call. Manager Waller.
Yes, with the corrections.
Okay. Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Bradley. Manager Bradley. Mike.
Yes,
Yeah, there
I was
you go.
getting feedback, so I turned it off. Sorry.
It's just a roll call. Manager.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Manager Wagaman, yes.
Okay. And I say yes. So we'll move on to the May 11th hearing.
Madam President, this is Manager Wagaman. I move to approve the May 11th, 2020 RCD4 public hearing minutes. This is Bradley, I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Out any further discussion? Roll call vote. Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wagaman.
Yes.
And Manager Priner, yes. Okay, May 13th, regular meeting minutes.
This is Manager Wagaman. Madam President, I move to approve the May 13th, 2020 regular meeting minutes. Bradley seconds.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wagaman.
Yes.
And Manager Priner, yes. That takes care of the minutes. Consent agenda?
President Kreiner,
Yes.
somebody joined us on the phone. I guess we should ask who it is, identify themselves. Hello?
Hello, this is Rebecca Howd, the Water Resources Manager for the City of Blaine.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, onto the consent agenda, page 22.
Yeah, President
President?
Reiner, Board of Managers, staff have 3 permit applications for consideration today. I will have 1 proposed edit here for permit application 20-025 that starts on, I guess the change is on page 32 of the packet. You'll note there that there are no special stipulations listed, and we would like to add one in for an as-built survey of one of the stormwater ponds. I can read the language here for you now. So stipulations after the colon, it would be the permit will be issued with the following stipulations as conditions of the permit. By accepting the permit, applicant agrees to these stipulations. another colon, and then there'd be the one stipulation, which would read, applicant must submit an as-built survey of Pond 2 demonstrating that the design capacity has been achieved.
Okay, everybody get the information?
Madam
Is there anybody?
President, with
Go ahead.
With
Yes.
that addition, I would move the consent agenda, and I would also add that I have looked at all 3 of these sites.
Okay. Do we have a second?
This is Manager Wagaman. I would second that.
Any further discussion? Further discussion? Okay, it'll be a roll call. Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Wynant,
Yes.
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Wagaman,
Yes.
and I say yes. Okay, now we're going to go to the permit application requiring board action. Page 44 of our packet. Did I hear somebody else buzz on the phone? Get in? Thought I heard another beep. Well, maybe I need hearing aids. Okay. Let's go to the variance request.
Patrick is muted.
Oh, Patrick.
I pressed it. It didn't work. I'm sorry. President Preiner, Board of Managers, in addition to the consent agenda, we have one further application that also has a variance request. This is for Ken Shenbein's property on Main Street in Lino Lakes. I'll have Houston Engineering, Chris Otterness, kind of run through the beginning, and then we'll go through the criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So, as Patrick noted, this is a variance for Ken Shenbein, applicant for the Shenbein Storage Project. He submitted a written response for variance from the Rice Creek Watershed District to Rule F6E2, which requires that a buffer adjacent to the wetland within the final WMC or wetland management corridor must average at least 50 feet in width, measure at least 25 feet on all points, and meet the average width at all points of concentrated inflow, hereafter referred to as the buffer requirement. District engineer evaluated the variance request per Rice Creek Rule L per permit 20016 and the request for variance and statement of hardship, which is included as Exhibit A with our memo, and dated March 22nd, 2020, revised May 15th, 2020. And I will note that the project is located in the Lino Lakes Comprehensive Wetland Protection and Management Plan, or CWPMP. It's within that boundary. The project proposes the construction of a new building, modification of a gravel road, and relocation of a building on a 35-acre parcel that is currently located, or I should say currently contains 2 residential structures and an equestrian business in Lino Lakes. The project will increase the total impervious surface from 3.9 to 4.4 acres and disturb 2.6 acres overall. The disturbed area contains a wetland complex and which flows through a private ditch to George Watch Lake, which would be the resource of concern. Proposed treatment for the project consists of 1 stormwater pond that has been designed to NERP standards, and the proposed application is compliant with all other Rice Creek rules.
Okay, so now we'll go through the discussion evaluation of the criteria. Criterion A, how substantial the variation is in relation to district rule requirements.
Per this criterion, the applicant has not met the 25-foot maximum buffer. The areas where the maximum widths are not met can be found on Exhibit A that has been provided in your packet. A 25-foot buffer around the wetlands on the site would require approximately 3.14 acres of buffer. The applicant has provided 2.6 acres, or 83% of the acreage. There are areas where only 1 foot of buffer will be provided between the existing feature and the wetland. Other than the 25-foot minimum width requirement of Rule FE2, the applicant will meet the remaining provisions of the buffer requirement, including meeting the 50-foot average providing 5.76 acres or 0.02 acres more than the required 5.74 acres.
Criterion B, the effect the variance would have on government services.
The issuance of a variance for the Shinebine storage project is not expected to increase flooding or have any negative effect on government services.
Criterion C, whether the variance will affect a substantial change in the character of the watershed resources or will be a substantial detriment to neighboring properties.
So for this criteria, we look at 3 different criteria. First being water quality, which is essentially the quantity of the pollutants such as phosphorus and total suspended sediments leaving the site and potential for degrading water quality downstream. Second criteria is the presence and potential impact of special impaired water bodies identified by various laws, including MPCA stormwater program. And then the third one is flooding, the potential for flood damages or adverse hydrologic impacts. In assessing whether a substantial change to the watershed resources may occur, we consider a number of different criteria, and these have been listed within our memorandum. George Watch Lake, which receives the project drainage, is listed on the Section 303D impaired water list for nutrients. The project as a whole is not expected to cause adverse impacts. Drainage from the majority of the project will sheet flow to a NERP pond, which treats 92% of the new reconstructed impervious surface runoff and mitigates the effect of the lack of buffer by removing pollutants prior to runoff entering the wetlands. The NERP pond has a outlet control structure and pipe outlet with flared end section and riprap, which provides skimming and energy dissipation functions that minimize the effect of concentrated flow on the buffer and wetland areas. Presence of threatened and endangered species within or near the project area has not been determined. However, the project is not proposing to impact any wetland. There are no scientific and natural areas within or near the project area. It's not likely that other resources identified above will be negatively affected by the reduced buffer widths and increase in buffer slope. Regarding this criterion, whether the variance has a negative effect on neighboring properties, we considered whether the granting the variance will first cause or contribute to a change in the 100-year floodplain elevation immediately downstream or upstream of the project site. Second, increase the frequency or magnitude of flood damages in adjacent properties. Or third, increase hardship downstream from peak flow or flood duration. The proposed project is for the buffer requirements on the CW and PMP, which has minimal effect on flood elevations. Applicant has complied with the Rule C stormwater requirements for peak rate and water quality. The proposed variance on the buffer requirements will have a minimal effect on the adjacent wetland resources. The variance is only requested for buffer width with respect to existing impervious surface features. The buffer requirements have been fully met around the new building area. If the variance is not granted, then there will be no buffer requirement for the property and existing conditions would not change. As there is currently no buffer, any additional buffer created will provide a partial benefit to the existing wetlands. There is no net decreases in wetland resource, and the project will provide an increased habitat area via the provided buffer.
Criterion D, whether the practical difficulty can be alleviated by a feasible method other than a variance.
So economic considerations play a role in the analysis under this factor. The variance is required for areas where the buffer cannot be provided due to existing site features. To meet the minimum buffer requirement, the applicant would have to remove the existing roads and horse training areas, all of which are necessary to run the business that's existing on site. Moving these features would not be a viable option as they're the minimal upland area on the property that is not either wetland or existing road or structure. Alternatively, the applicant could fill the wetland to create the buffer, which is not considered acceptable under the Wetland Conservation Act and is not considered prudent.
Criterion E, how the practical difficulty occurred, including whether the landowner created the need for the variance.
The district engineer finds that the current landowner did not cause the situation which led to the implied practical difficulty. The existing structures were constructed prior to the requirements of the CWPMP buffers. The need for a variance was created by the applicant's desire to do additional work on the property. Per the discussion above, the applicant finds that there is no feasible way to do the project which meets the requirements of the applicant and the district without a variance.
And lastly, criterion F, whether in light of all of the above factors, allowing the variance will serve the interests of justice.
As always, this criterion lies largely in the board's domain as it involves judgment of a non-technical nature. Our one criterion for assessing this portion of the practical difficulty standard is the ability or inability of other permit applicants with similar site conditions to comply with the district's buffer requirements of Rule F6E2. Other applicants have had the ability to feasibly meet these requirements on site because the site constraints presented here were not evident in the previous applications.
Okay. Any questions from the board or comments? Questions or comments?
Madam President, this is Manager Bradley. I intend to vote in favor of this. This is another one of those instances where granting the variance improves water quality. Therefore, we're better off going ahead and allowing this than we would be to reject it.
Madam President, this is Manager Wagaman, and I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Go ahead and introduce a motion then if you like.
Go ahead, John.
Madam
John?
President?
Yes.
I'll move the ordinance, a variance be granted here. I see it's 2000-016 to approve the variance request for 2000-016 is outlined in accordance with the Rice Creek Watershed District Engineers Variance Technical Memorandum dated May 20th, 2020.
Bradley seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? No further
Madam
discussion? Oh, go
Madam
ahead.
President, I just mentioned that I agree with Mike that we see quite a few of these. And maybe this is something that should be taken a look at a later time. You know, this variance comes in quite often for some reason.
I think we have that on our agenda to look at.
All right. Okay, thank you.
That is
That's
correct.
correct, President Priner.
Okay, so we'll have a roll call. Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Winan,
Yes.
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Wagaman,
Yes.
and Manager Priner, yes. Okay, we need a motion on the permit application itself.
Madam President, I'll move the permit application be approved, or Caprock, I should say. 2020-016 is outlined in the May 20, 2020 report.
Bradley seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Winan,
Yes.
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Wagaman,
Yes.
and I say yes, so it will move forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Open mic, is there anybody at this time that'd like to speak to open mic on something that's not on our agenda? Hearing none, we're going to move on to items requiring board action. And at this time, we're going to go to the public informational meeting. And excuse me, the purpose of the meeting is to provide information to and receive input from the public regarding the district stormwater pollution prevention program. We'll ask for technician San Pedro to provide a brief presentation for our audience. Lauren?
Thank you, President Priner and Board of Managers, for having me today to hold a public information meeting on the District Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program, or SWIP. I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me. Let's see. All right. All right. Every year we're required to hold a public information meeting on our SWIP under the MS4 permit. The MS4 permit is a federally mandated permit by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. It is administered locally in Minnesota by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, or MPCA. It authorizes stormwater discharge from our municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4, which in our case is the public drainage system, to waters of the state. The MS4 permit is designed to reduce the amount of sediment and pollutants that enter surface water and groundwater from storm sewer systems as much as possible. The current MS4 permit became effective on August 1st of 2013. It did expire on July 31st of 2018, but the district can continue to operate under this permit until the permit is reissued. The permit reissuance was delayed, and the MPCA is now planning to reissue the permit sometime this fall. The district completed Part 1 of the MS4 permit reapplication process in January of 2018. Part 2 will occur after the permit is formally reissued, again likely this fall. And as part of the Part 2 application, the district will need to update its SWIP. And we'll have 150 days after the permit is reissued to do so. Here's a map of our coverage area under the MS4 permit. We are a non-traditional MS4 in that our MS4 is a public drainage system only within the urbanized areas of the district as determined by the decennial census. We're only required to report on those areas, on those urban areas, which are shaded in pink on the map. There may be future changes to the district's coverage area depending on the 2020 census. For example, if Forest Lake's population increases enough around the JD4 area to be considered an urbanized area, our coverage area will likely extend northward. There may also be changes after the MPCA responds to the comments that were received during the permit reissuance public comment period. However, definitive language from the MPCA is forthcoming and is not known at this time. The MS4 permit requires us to develop a SWIP that addresses 6 minimum control measures. The SWIP describes our strategies and best management practices for each of the minimum control measures, which are public education and outreach, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management and new development and redevelopment, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping. All staff at the district help implement BMPs to meet the MS4 permit requirements and will be involved in Part 2 of the permit application process. The next few slides here are highlights from our SWIP and our 2019 MS4 annual report, which is on page 61 in your packets, which show how we've addressed the 6 minimum control measures. The first one is, again, public education and outreach. In 2019, we wrote several community newspaper and newsletter articles for communities in our district and created targeted materials for specific groups such as utility bill inserts. We also hosted and participated in many workshops and stormwater related events reaching over 7,000 people, such as through the Children's Water Festival, presentations and outreach to contractors and HOAs, and several Blue Thumb and Lawns to Legumes workshops on topics like turf management, rain garden maintenance, and salting and winter maintenance workshops. We also regularly utilized our website and our Facebook page to provide public education and outreach. We've seen an increase in both of those pages, with the biggest increase in Facebook. In 2018, we had 21,000 website users and a total reach of 20,000 Facebook users. And in 2019, it increased to over 23,000 website users and a reach of over 54,000 Facebook users. We address the public education and outreach minimum control measures through several other programs and efforts, such as our water quality grant program and mini grant programs. In 2019, 13 water quality grant projects and 20 mini grant projects were approved. We also participated in several collaborative education programs and provided resources to our partners through several avenues, like Blue Thumb, the Anoka County Water Resource Outreach Collaborative, and the Master Water Steward Program. We also held several technical advisory committee meetings for the development of the 2020 Watershed Management Plan and had significant participation in that effort. And we also saw significant participation in the Adopt a Drain program within the district. Overall, we leverage our relationships and partnerships in our community to get the biggest bang for our buck. We coordinate our education efforts with our partners to avoid duplication and increase the effectiveness of our efforts. For the second minimum control measure, public participation, we hold an annual SWIP public information meeting, as we're having now, to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on our SWIP. We have not received any written or verbal comments related to our SWIP prior to this meeting. However, the City of Centerville did communicate they would like to provide comments today. The third minimum control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination. We are again unique since our MS4 only includes public drainage system in urban areas. So illicit discharge in our MS4 would likely come from an outfall in the public ditch system rather than a storm drain like with a city MS4. To prevent illicit discharge, we regulate land disturbances near our ditches through implementation and enforcement of district rules. And we monitor the water quality of our ditches during routine inspections. If we receive a complaint of a known or suspected illicit discharge, we investigate the illicit discharge using our illicit discharge enforcement procedures. All field staff at the district are trained on illicit discharge identification and district procedures. Staff did identify one illicit discharge in 2019. The district coordinated with the City of Roseville on the enforcement of that illicit discharge because it's entered both the district and the city's MS4s. The fourth minimum control measure is construction site stormwater control, stormwater runoff control. We actively implement and enforce controls through our district rules, and we follow our construction site inspection and enforcement response procedures for violations. In 2019, there were 101 active construction sites that were greater than 1 acre. We completed 563 site inspections for those sites greater than 1 acre, and we sent out 183 violation notices, most of which were through inspection reports, though 11 of the notices were 10-day work without a permit or enforcement letters. The fifth minimum control measure is post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment. We actively implement and enforce this control measure through our permit review and inspection processes, especially through Rule C. We also require ditch drainage and utility easements for some projects and require stormwater operation and maintenance agreements for required stormwater treatment BMPs. In 2019, we reviewed about 67 projects that required permanent stormwater treatment BMPs. The last minimum control measure is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This measure is regarding how we maintain our MS4 to prevent or reduce pollutant discharges. We meet this through our routine inspection and maintenance of the public drainage system and our annual inspection of district-owned facilities within the urban areas of the district. In 2019, we completed at least one inspection of all of our district-owned facilities and outfalls within our MS4. As part of the permit, we are only required to inspect 20% of those. Lastly, in addition to the 6 minimum control measures, as part of the MS4 annual report and SWIP, we also report on discharges to impaired waters with an approved total maximum daily load, or TMDL. We have designated categorical waste load allocations for the Hardwood Creek TMDL and the Golden Lake TMDL, and are required to report on any completed activities that were done to meet those allocations. The Hardwood Creek is impaired for biota, dissolved oxygen, and total suspended solids, or TSS, and Golden Lake is impaired for phosphorus. In 2019, a new project that was completed by the City of Circle Pines was an iron enhanced sand filter project, which will help with the Golden Lake TMDL goals. After the MS4 permit is reissued sometime this fall, we will need to report on additional TMDLs than just the Hardwood Creek and Golden Lake TMDLs, and we'll also need to provide more detail and documentation on how we will help reach the assigned waste load allocations. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions or comments for me?
Hearing none, we'll go ahead. Thank you. District Edition San Pedro. I want to get this right every time. Okay, so before we get to the purpose of the meeting, first of all, we all know that we're to receive comments and questions from interested parties regarding the SWIP. During public comment, managers are welcome to ask questions on commenters to clarify their remarks. District Technician San Pedro is available to respond to questions and comments. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and start, and we'll just ask if there's anybody in the audience that'd like to speak. Please state your name, address, and your affiliation. So with that, anybody else that'd like to speak to this?
Hi, I'm Mark Stotts from the City of Centerville. I'm the city administrator and the city engineer, if I could have the floor.
Certainly.
Thank you for letting me speak at today's public input meeting, and thank you, Lauren, for the presentation. It was very informative. I think I want to start off by thanking President Preiner and Commissioner Wagaman for meeting with us the other week to discuss some of these issues that I'm going to probably already bring up, but I thought I would read them into the public record here at a formal public meeting and public input meeting. Sure. As you're aware, my city's general point of view here is that a lot of what was just presented we feel is redundant to what our city and all cities in your district are already required to do. We as well are MS4s. We have the exact same program, all 6 minimum control measures that you have, and are required to meet all of those as well. Now, in some cases, you guys have a separate MS4 system. As you mentioned, your ditch system is different, and that those things are not maintained by the cities. And so you have responsibilities there that are unique to your ditch system. And our general, again, approach would be that we would hope the district would concentrate on those efforts, the system that you own and operate. That's the purpose of the MS4 permit, is it allows you to own and operate and maintain a system of municipal stormwater conveyance. And that's exactly what the cities in your district do as well. So we have stormwater ponds, stormwater pipes, and ditches and those types of things as well. And we maintain those and are asked to adhere to the 6 minimum control measures outlined in our permit. So again, just going through the 6 minimum control measures. Control measure number 1, public outreach. It sounds like you're partnering with a lot of people. We like to see partnerships. And again, I think Lauren had 5, 6 organizations there that we're partnering with. I think it's important to make sure that we're distinguishing between partnership and what we're just sort of being redundant with too. So I think there's a lot of outreach going on out there, and we want to make sure that our resources are being used wisely with those partnerships. But again, I think for the most part, welcome partnerships. Minimum control measure number 2, public input meeting. That's pretty simple. This is not redundant. You need to do this for your system. Minimum control measure number 3, illicit discharges. It sounds like for the most part, you're concentrating on illicit discharges to your system. And maybe Lauren could address that briefly, just that, are you looking for illicit discharges to other waters other than your own system?
We do look for that when we're out doing inspections, but we notify the appropriate MS4 and stop there with any enforcement.
Thank you. Yep, that makes total sense. Thank you. So again, I'm glad to see that we're not duplicating efforts. Minimum control measure number 4, construction site control. Here's where, again, I think it's our city's one area where we see that the duplication is really the most prevalent. I believe it said you had 563 site inspections. Can you clarify, Lauren, those are site inspections, not just in and around your ditches, but those are throughout the district, correct?
Correct. It's difficult for us to track the areas solely around our MS4 through our inspection database, and so it is reported for our district as a whole.
Right, and just so we're clear, those erosion control inspections, are they required by this? Does the district feel that those inspections are required under your MS4, or are they simply required because you have a rule in place on erosion control? So in other words, you have, I'm sorry, the rule that it is, but about erosion control on sites. And so are those, I guess what I'm getting at is perhaps the 563 number should not be included in your MS4 permit. What am I talking about here? The report that you give to the MPCA, because I'm not sure that those 563 inspections are really being done for your MS4. They're really being done on behalf of the watershed rule. Is that, am I making myself clear there is what I'm talking about?
President Preiner?
Certainly.
If I could further a staff response, this is Administrator Tomczyk. The district, as Lauren noted, doesn't make a distinction between the district's MS4 for the public drainage system, which include all those areas that drain to it. Lauren showed an earlier map. The pink area is specific to our MS4. Certainly there's some areas that are vastly outside of that, but we do not make the distinction that Mark is referring to. I would say that as part of the comments that we received in the comparison of the MS4, we've looked a bit at that, and it would be very challenging for the district to make a sub-boundary, if you will, of the specific drainage area to our public drainage system. It's certainly possible, but it would meander around all the parcels of the district and define those that definitively go to the drainage system. So there's a level of effort there.
Okay.
Mark, could I ask you a question, please?
Sure, please.
So when you're saying that, just so we all understand, because we're in this every day, what impact does that have to your city then? And why are you coming on this? I am just trying to understand.
Because we see duplication of efforts here, Madam President. So your staff, who does a wonderful job out on site, comes and does a erosion control inspection on our site. And 5 minutes later, my consultant comes out and does an erosion control inspection on the exact same site, looking for the exact same things and reporting on the exact same things to the contractor. And the contractor now has two sets of regulators that are telling him the same thing, or sometimes slightly different things, right? And that's where it becomes problematic. Not to mention that the contractor who is operating on the site is required to have a permit, an NPDES permit, a construction site permit, and they're required to do the exact same inspection themselves and have trained inspectors. And so they are self-reporting, then you're reporting, and then we're reporting. And so there's like triplication of this effort. And it just seems like bad government, because our taxpayers pay for your inspector, our taxpayers pay for our inspector, and in turn, in a certain sense, we all pay for the construction site inspector through the price of that property when it's sold.
Does that delay the project at all?
No, I don't.
Conflict?
I suppose there's that possibility, but that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern is the duplication of government regulation, okay, and the waste of taxpayer dollars on that.
President Preiner?
Yep, go ahead.
If I could pose a question. This duplication seems inherent in how the state has set up the program, right? The PCA on behalf of the federal government. Wouldn't your concerns be better at that level? Or what are you suggesting in your comments to the district, Mr. Stats?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think that on page 75 of your packet today, there's a question on the permit report that talks about partnerships. And you guys have some partnerships in existence with Hugo and Circle Pines. And I think, Mr. Tomzik, we could agree that perhaps there is just this inherent duplication in the law, and we're both required to do it. And so why don't we get together and call ourselves an institute, as Mr. Simon once spoke. I think that if we both submitted the same one and put both our names on it, we are both covered, and we're only paying for one inspector, right? And so I think that's where I would like to see us go is, you know, if we can't beat them, let's join them, and let's just get together. And so we're not having two inspectors tromp through the same muddy site and report on the same broken down silt fence. And that's where I'd like to get to, is where we have either an agreement with the Watershed District where we say on my MS4 report, and mine, I mean my cities that I'm as a city engineer submitting, I would like to say we have a partnership with, you know, under the minimum control measure 3 or 4 construction site runoff. I'm going to say, no, we don't have our own program. We rely on Rice Creek Watershed District through a partnership, or vice versa. If you guys want to quit that program and rely on the cities, then let's do that. But let's have one or the other. Let's not have us both report that we both have our own programs that inspect the exact same site.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Mark, and I think we're going to follow through to see if there's a way to do this. I don't know if there's anything, Lois, anything legal that you can pull off the top of your head, or do we need to research?
Madam President, it's perfectly appropriate to figure out a way to cooperate with cities to coordinate inspections. I think most typically the challenge is that there are an awful lot of sites that don't get inspected, you know, across many metro watersheds. So making sure that they are inspected and coordinating the effort and avoiding duplication is very appropriate for the district to do in cooperation with cities.
Okay. Very good.
And then, so just, I'll try to wrap up here. I don't mean to much of your time, but just going down the minimum control measures again, down to number 5. Again, we have a topic here where post-construction management, which is essentially the design, I wish they just called it the design of the project. So we're talking about how is the project designed to handle the rules of the MS4 permit, where we have control of phosphorus and other pollutants like that. And so this is your equivalent to your Rule C. Okay, and so that's, again, in duplication, I believe in most regard. And I think you guys are working on that from our previous discussions, sort of a side-by-side comparison. But if your rule does not do anything more than duplicate what is already regulated here in this MS4 permit, then I'd ask why we have that rule and why we see fit to, again, duplicate that regulation that already exists. And so again, we have this same thing happening here. In theory, when a development comes in, it goes through your permit process. Your consultants spend lots of time and effort and money reviewing that, giving comments to the developer saying your stormwater pond isn't big enough, you got to have this or that BMP. And guess what? As an MS4, I'm also required to do that. I'm also required to have an engineer review that plan and make comments about those same things and ensure that those plans meet the stormwater requirements for my city, for our MS4. And those are the exact same requirements as your MS4, except if your Rule C, goes above and beyond that. And if that's the case, then again, any reporting we do to on your MS4 permit should not indicate that those reviews were done on behalf of the permit. It should be said that we just do those because we choose to, because we can make a rule and we want to do that. And we want to go above and beyond. And then we can get into the discussion about whether or not going above and beyond does any good. But that's a separate discussion for a separate day. Today, we're talking about the MS4 permit and the inherent regulation that is already there in that permit, and whether or not that needs to be duplicated across the two organizations here. And so then again, just the final MCM, which is number 6, The coverage area, I just had a comment on that. Again, now this is not duplication. This is something you're required there for good housekeeping. I'm sorry, is the MCM. But again, this is something that, again, mostly if you're concentrating on good maintenance around your system, then that makes a lot of sense. If we're not sweeping streets and those types of things that aren't draining to your ditch system, that makes sense. I will say that in my previous experience with townships, you may wish to look at the urbanized area part of this permit. I know that in a couple of townships I worked for, it was argued that even though a tiny bit of their township was in the urbanized area, as made clear by the Census Bureau, the U.S. Census Bureau, the entire township was regarded as an MS4, and we were required to regulate the entire township, which really was unfortunate. I'm not sure if that has changed, but I'm not sure what your jurisdiction map, because I see that you sort of have just highlighted the urbanized areas, but we were told by the US EPA actually that no, you need to regulate the entire thing. And so I'm not sure if that's the case for you guys or not, but those are my comments. Again, there's 6 minimum control measures. As I kind of laid out here, I believe that, at least 3 of those are duplicative, and we could work on partnerships that eliminated some of that duplication, and I hope we can do that going forward. Thank you for your time, Madam President.
Yes, and thank you for being here. It's very informational. Any other questions for Mark?
Madam President, this is District Engineer Otterness. I just wanted to touch base real quick on the one comment made by Mark regarding the stormwater management criteria, the permanent stormwater features. One important thing to note is that Rule C for the Watershed District includes items related to both water quality and water quantity, whereas the MS4 requirements that you're required to manage are strictly related to water quality. In doing our reviews, it is difficult, if not impossible, to separate the two during our reviews. And so it is something that the district does manage. It's very important to the district to manage that water quantity piece, which again is above and beyond what those MS4 requirements are. And that's, just for clarity, that's one of the reasons why the district manages and has a rule related to that stretches above and beyond the MS4 requirements throughout the Watershed District.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Any other comments or questions?
Madam President, are you accepting comments from board members at this point?
I think if there's anybody else out there that would like to speak, we'll do that first, and then the board can discuss it. Anybody else out there like to speak to this issue? Hearing none, please, we have to close our informational meeting, and then we're gonna go to discussion. Okay, so got that closed, and we're gonna go to discussion of the board. Go ahead, Mike.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Stats for commenting. I know we have, as a group, decided we do want to review our rules and make sure we are not duplicating what we don't have to. And I know based on past experience that when we've had trouble with somebody complying with erosion, that we like to look to the cities because they have actually better power to enforce than we do. They can deny a building permit. We have to yell at them and threaten them with actions. So I'm fully in favor of us, where a city is willing to work with us, as apparently Centerville is, to figure out a way that we can actually work together to make this better. I think you can do a better job than we can on enforcing that sort of thing. At the same time, we've got our own obligations, and maybe they can, instead of doing it the second time, they can adopt us as their arm to do the studies, for example. So maybe there's something in this for both of us. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. And I got to say too that we have discussed doing a comparison so that we all understand where the rules set and what we are responsible for. And we are going to do that shortly, Mark, and we'll have some answers. We'll be able to continue our conversation. Anybody else want to?
This is Manager Wagaman. I would just like to say I agree with both of you. I don't need to repeat it all because I think Mike covered it real well. Whenever we can work together, I think it benefits both parties. And so hopefully we can get together and work things out for the betterment of both sides.
Okay, we do need a motion. That's on page 59 of our packet.
Madam President, Bradley, I move
Just a
to
minute,
accept.
just a minute, I'm sorry, I muted it, I'm sorry.
Madam President, Mike, go ahead and make the motion. I'll second it and then I'll have a discussion.
Very good. I move to accept the 2019 MS4 annual report and direct the administrator to submit the report to the MPCA.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Waller. Yes, I have a comment. First of all, I do agree with Manager Bradley and President Preiner. And I think it's important that Mark, that you come and attend the future discussions when we have about these rules and the duplicativeness of them, particularly. As to the comment about water quantity control, that's a very important aspect of this. There's no question about that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the district has to, rule couldn't be modified to be more in line with what goes on with the ditches. In other words, the city's going to become an urbanized area. There's going to be a pipe that they're going to put this water into. At that point, when it enters the MS4 with the district quantity control, we can monitor and decide and make a rule and let the cities implement that part of the inspection of those stormwater plans to make sure, or ponds, to make sure that conforms with the quantity rules that the district has. So I look forward to doing that. I think it's a very important point here that, you know, we oftentimes are spending a lot of money. That's what I've asked Administrator Tomzak to, and he's going to talk about it later on in the meeting, to just see what the costs are on these factors. That kind of goes along with what Mike had asked a few weeks ago about reduction in engineering and legal costs. And so with that, I'll vote yes to accept the report.
Okay, Manager Waller, yes.
Yes.
Manager Winan.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wagaman.
Yes.
And Manager Preiner, yes. So thank everybody, and I think we'll continue this conversation. I'm sure we'll have many to adjust things if it's available to do. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is to consider the EPG purchase order adjustment. That'd be Kyle, page 79.
Madam President, members of the board, thank you again. Just a small agenda item here. If you recall, back in February, we had approved a purchase order with EPG companies for the iron enhanced sand filter system components and programming for the Bald Eagle Lake iron enhanced sand filter, which we will be constructing this summer. In our final review of that with this district engineer and EPG, we realized it was one location in the system that we needed to change a breakout box for the high voltage motor leads for the pump. We need that to be more secure than was originally proposed, so that we don't have a curious child opening the box and getting zapped. So we're gonna upgrade that box to a more secure stainless steel box with ability to be locked and is water resistant, along with a stainless steel stand for that box. It's an increase in price of $1,473. The board's previous approval of that purchase order did not include any contingency or administratively approved increase in costs. So I wanted to bring that to the board for approval. And we've got a motion for you, draft motion on page 80 of your packet, and then the additional purchase order for $1,473 follows on page 81 of the packet. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I just want to say that you should do that with anything that the Watershed does. It's a good idea. Okay, I need a motion if anybody would like to propose it. Page 80.
There you go.
Madam President, I'll move to authorize the district administrator to amend the purchase order number BELIESF 2020 dated February 26, 2020 with EPG Companies Incorporated by adding the contents of EPG quote number 27072.
This is Manager Wynand. I would second that.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, it'll be a roll call. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Wynand?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager Wageman?
Yes.
And Manager Priner? Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank
Madam
you.
President, this is
Yes.
Marcy. I have a question. This is more procedural. Is there a dollar amount that is set that requires this board action? I mean, how much leeway does the administrator have? Could you have added 500 to this? Is it 1,000?
Madam President, Manager Wynant, if I may, typically, I believe the district administrator has board authority or authority from the board to approve, expenses up to like $10,000, I believe, and then up to 30,000. The president can execute those service agreements. Because this one totaled, the original approval was 56,000 and change. We had a board meeting coming up. I just thought it would be best to bring it back to you, just so you're aware of the additional expense.
Okay, and it's good
Already
to know
exceed
about.
those numbers.
All right, thank you.
Right.
And it's also good to note, as Pat said, about the safety consideration.
Correct.
That's important. Thank you.
President Priner,
ahead.
and Kyle, Manager Wynant, point of clarification, there are contracts that do include a contingency that is sometimes delegated to the administrator, 10% of the total price. I don't think that was present in this material. So that's another reason to bring it back to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President, if I could just add one 30-second note.
Go ahead.
In addition, our advice is when the board has already taken an action approving a contract, notwithstanding the administrator's spending authority, any changes to that board approved amount should come back to the board. So I think for a variety of reasons, this was good to have back.
Good housekeeping. Yes, thank you. Okay, then we're going to move on to the resolution 2020-17, findings and order correcting drainage system record for Ramsey County Ditch 4. Nick,
Yes, President Priner, Board of Managers. I'll note that Council John Kolb is on the line, as well as technician Ashley Ritchie. This is follow-up to your public hearing and all the procedures that you had in regards to the record for Ramsey County Ditch 4. Mr. Kolb has put together this findings in order for your consideration, and we're happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions by the board? Any questions? If not, we'll need a motion. Page 86 of our packet, I believe.
So just to be clear, we did have a motion in the minutes from our last meeting, and we held, how did we do this? We kept it open for another week for comment?
President Priner, Manager Wynant, that's generally correct. At the public hearing, you left the record open to receive any comments that might come in written form by US mail or email or what have you, giving people to respond once again to the information you hear. That's, I think Mr. Kolb would support, critically important under the current COVID situation and the meetings by alternative means. And so we've had that time frame. Staff was attentive to any additional incoming materials, which there weren't any. And then we're prepared the order here and brought it to you. Is that correct, Mr. Kolb?
It is. The motion that was taken at the close of the public comment period, the live public comment period, is at paragraph 17 of the findings. That's on page 85 of your board packet. And then the comments, we have the comments of Department of Transportation, which are addressed in Exhibit B, which is a comment and response log. And then we had the two comments that were at the live hearing, Ms. Marone and Mr. Fox, who really didn't have any substantive comments to the records correction, just had some other general questions. So that was it. And I think we've complied with the board's direction based on its motion at the hearing itself.
All right. Any other questions? I still need a motion.
So Madam President, if I've got this right, you need a motion that states the Board of Managers hereby corrects the drainage system record of RCD4 to reflect functional alignment, dimension and grade of the combined system as detailed in the engineer's historical review memorandum dated January 15th, 2018, as amended on November 7th, 2019, attached as Exhibit A, and to vacate and abandon any remnant portion of RCD4 not included in the functional alignment details in the historical review memorandum dated January 15th, 2018, as amended.
Okay, that's
Madam
for
President, this
resolution
is
number
Bradley.
20.
Would
Go
you
ahead.
accept a friendly amendment to begin her motion by saying I approve resolution number 2020-17 as contained in our board packet, and then the following, in the order she read.
Okay,
Okay, we have a
I
friendly
take that
amendment.
as friendly. Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
is that a second, Manager?
It was.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call, be Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Wyman,
Yes,
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Wageman,
Yes.
and I say yes, so the motion passes. Thank you. And we're going to move on to the ACD 5362. It's on page 125.
Yes, President Priner, Board of Managers, this is similar in that it's an order for the public drainage system. Here you had a party petition the district for realignment and partial abandonment of Anoka County Ditch 5362 for a proposed development. You had a number of comments with forgive me, you had your public hearing and also a number of comments from that, from Anoka County, and some dialogue with the developer. I'll note again that Ashley Ritchie and Council Cole are on the line, and maybe John, you'd like to review a little bit of the materials, the dialogue with Anoka County and where we're at for the final order.
Be happy to do that, Madam President, members of the board. I think if we start on page 127 of your packet, starting at paragraph 13 of the proposed findings, we detail out the written comments from Anoka County, which really had to do twofold. One was with the effect of taking the main channel flow of water from the current alignment of the main channel and then rerouting it through branch 5 and redesignating branch 5 as the main channel. And then second, what effect that will have on protection of the transportation corridor on County State 8 Highway 12 and possible future expansion. And based on those two concerns, they articulated a request that the petitioner, who is the owner of the land traversed by branch 5, provide additional drainage system right-of-way in the event that in the future the drainage system might have to be, branch 5 may have to be moved in some way to accommodate expansion of County State 8 Highway 12. The basis of that is detailed out through paragraph 16 and 17 of the proposed order. The parcels involved are identified in paragraph 18 of the order, and the actual additional easement area is designated in an exhibit prepared by Anoka County, in Exhibit A. And just for note, it's also laid out in the findings that a representative of the petitioner had, and the owner of that parcel had no objection to the additional drainage system right of way. So it became actually a friendly addition to the proceedings. And other than that, there were no other major concerns about the rerouting or partial abandonment of the system.
Any questions from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam President, this is Manager Wagaman. I moved resolution 2020-18, resolving granting petition of Wellington Management, Inc. and Alliance Bank for realignment of a portion of ACD 5362 and partially abandoning the drainage system remnant and realignment with the following resolutions. If I can get to them. Therefore be it resolved that the Board of Managers directs the following actions. The petition of Wellington Management, Inc. with support of the landowners, Alliance Bank for the realignment of a portion of ACD 5362, including the main trunk and branches 4 and 5, and to abandon the remnant portion of the drainage system after realignment as indicated in the petition. An engineer's report is granted subject to the conditions further stated herein. B, the cost of proceedings be charged to the petitioner's bond. Any deficiency in the bond to cover the cost of the proceedings shall be paid by the petitioner prior to release of this order. C, the petitioner may proceed to make the drainage system modification as petitioned upon. Release of this order, approval, execution and recording of an additional drainage system right-of-way easement on Outlot B, and the petitioner obtaining all required and necessary permits, right-of-way and easements for the drainage system modification. D, the petition must proceed and finish the drainage system modification as petitioned within 3 years of this order, or this order is null and void. And finally, E, upon payment of costs and clearing all contingencies, the drainage system record shall be amended to reflect the realignment and partial abandonment as petitioned.
Second, Bradley.
So we have a motion and a second. Is any further discussion?
Madam President?
Yes, go ahead.
The only thing I noticed, looking over Mr. Wilder's discussions here, he did mention in his question at the very end about excess water going into the system. He did mention the weir under 35. I see it. The word weir is not in the comments that he made here.
So,
Madam President, it's John. I tried to paraphrase what was of substance to the actual rerouting and partial abandonment. If I missed that particular detail, I apologize. I know it is contained in more detail in the verbatim minute transcript of the proceedings. And if the board would like, we can add that detail to the comment.
okay. Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Well, wait, Teresa's corrected me here. Turning the page a little farther on, it does say weir. So I withdraw my comment here.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Wynant?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager Wagaman?
Yes.
And Manager Priner, I'll abstain. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing is the response to Hugo letter.
Yes, President Priner, Board of Managers, here before you, we have a draft letter to the city of Hugo. It is intended to be a response and update, a response to their letter sent November 21st on page 134 of your packet, which raises a number of issues on Judicial Ditch 3 and our proposed work. There have been any number of emails and communications regarding the matters with Hugo, a couple of which we would like to update our draft with. beyond what is currently present there, if I could.
Mhm. Go ahead.
One of the comments that came from the city of Hugo is in regards that the cost be broken out. If we could show them what the cost would likely be for the specific culverts that they would be responsible for. Here, that would be the one noted in the final paragraph on page 135 of the packet, which is a culvert associated with a trail system that was present on the landscape prior to this alternative current use. So the city would be responsible for the cost of that, and they'd just like to know what that is. Further, I'll note that the Hugo letter looks for communication in regards to tree clearing at between stations 34 and 67. We'd like to put a note in our letter about that, basically that the footprint of the work has been minimized to the extent possible by moving it to the east slightly to the existing fence line. In the context of the plans and such, of course, that would make some sense to the reader, if you will. And then there is subject matter in the letter regarding our arrangement on the Clearwater Creek Preserve, which is Hugo property used in their park system, and an arrangement where they will allow us access beyond the district's right-of-way, basically using their property to access the system and go about our work. And we don't know definitively what that would look like. At its most formal, it would be an easement, although the city has communicated they're comfortable with something a little less formal. Whether that's an agreement, license, MOU, memorandum of understanding, that's something we'd work out with council. John Kolb, if you'd like to make comment about what that might look like and whether or not, in addition, that would have to come back to the board, or is that something that the administrator or board president could sign with some action today?
We're planning to draft this as a simple license to allow for access across the park property according to a designated and actually depicted access route, which Houston has provided. The only two commitments that the Watershed District would be making in that license is that the district will assure that the use of the property will be reasonably confined and not unnecessarily interfere with the city's use of the remainder of the property. And two, that the district will restore the property as nearly as is practical to its pre-use condition and shall repair any and all damage to the property resulting from the exercise of the rights granted in the license agreement. So if the board is okay with that, that is generally the simplicity that the city is looking for. And you could authorize the president to sign it. It would be witnessed by the administrator, obviously, in the document. So that's something that could be done today unless the board would rather look at this. My only caveat to that would be if we presented this to the city and they wanted more detail in it, more than what we've discussed today, it would likely have to come back to the board for consideration.
Madam President?
Go ahead.
John, the issue I see here is to make sure that the district doesn't find ourselves when we're performing the maintenance that the city, as Ramsey County's park system did when we were cleaning up the ponds over on Long Lake, come back and send us with a huge amount of dollars for what they determined were damage to the park. And so that's all I ask, is that there be some kind of protection in there, or that we don't let the district isn't open to that kind of a claim after we perform the maintenance.
The way that is usually handled, and it's a good observation, Manager Waller, is that we document in advance of the work the conditions that we've encountered. and that would likely occur between the district's representative, probably Ashley, and somebody from the city, so that we can document the route that we're proposing to use, the conditions along the route, and then we can go back afterwards and restore anything out there. That's our best protection to that.
And Madam President, just for the history of it, the way we got around that the next time was to change the method by which we cleaned the ditch from using tracked vehicles to using vacuum. And laid the pipe out, so we didn't have the big tracks in there that caused the ruts in there, grass, and that maybe that's something that Ashley will put in the back of the file to prevent that claim coming from the city that you wrecked our park and everything's horrible, and send us a huge rehabilitation bill.
Madam President, if I may.
Go ahead.
Engineer Otterness again. Yeah, in response to that, you bring up a very good point, Manager Waller, and as John noted, we have done this in the past before. One example was on that Halls Marsh project, where we did a lot of work documenting. We actually did both photographs and a quick drone flight to show what the condition of the pavement was and other site conditions were prior to going in there. So it's definitely a good point, and we'll make sure to do a very good documentation of that. And then, as you know, Manager Waller will look to see what kind of additional measures we can take to ensure that pavements or other things out there are not disrupted to add additional cost to the project. I think one other thing that's important to point out is that the reason that we're going down this alternative route is in part based on city request itself, and that's related to both their use of their city park property and to avoid disruption of some of the neighboring landowners to the ditch. If we completed access just strictly within the right-of-way of the drainage system, there would have been additional impacts both to the adjacent landowners and to the city property. So, it's important to note that's they're part of the reason why we're looking at this now.
Madam President, I support the changes made to the letter. I have no further comment.
So the agrees it doesn't need to come back. We're just going to go ahead and make the changes.
Correct. President Priner, with the discussion, I think we can issue a letter that covers these communications with Hugo to show a goodwill response to what they have, formally asked of the district, specific to the agreement about access. And perhaps I missed it, but John, with the board's, Mr. Kolb, with the board's concerns and noting that the related or similarly situated projects, would this pre-project walkthrough with a representative of Hugo be a part of that agreement document, just to ensure that it takes place and both parties are on board about what that looks like?
I will add to the comment about the pre-work condition. I will add a comment in there as established by a joint pre-work inspection. And the city, I think the city will be agreeable to that.
Okay. Thank you, John. President Priner, if I could, Ashley's done a good deal of work in regards to this, so I certainly commend her and appreciate her work. And with that, I'm wondering, Ashley, did we miss anything that was pertinent or that had came up during those sporadic, if you will, communications between the parties? I think we touched them all.
Had the other mic off. So Madam President, Board of Managers, I think for the most part, we've touched on everything. The main concerns were culvert costs, access agreements, and tree removal. And so touching on those is the main concerns that I've discussed with the city. The city is excited to see this project go through, and they've just asked you know, for the minor breakout, which I have provided the bid costs estimates. And so adding those to the letter just to be consistent so that when they see the bill come in, they know where it's coming from and what it's going to, because they will be paying from or expect to pay from different accounts of their own. So yeah, it's touched on everything that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Well, then what we need is a motion on page 133, maybe to sign the letter.
Yep. President Preiner, if I could, to amend the letter as discussed, sign it, send it, and then to authorize you to sign the agreement, license, what Mr. Kolb creates would also be important. If it is important that come back to the board, we do probably have time, but I think we've covered the issue here quite well.
I'll entertain a motion.
So, Madam President, I'll move that the administrator sign a letter to the city of Hugo about the issues with the repair of Anoka County, Washington Judicial Ditch 3 with the culverts, the trees clearing, and the access property, and that when the agreement comes back, that the president has authority to sign it. Is that the two things you needed there?
That's correct.
That's correct, yes.
Bradley seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I've heard no comment from the city of Hugo about this, Madam President, so all quiet is good.
Okay, we'll go with that for today. All right, roll call. Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Winan.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wageman.
Yes.
And Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Okay, let's check register.
Madam President, I move to approve check register dated May 27th, 2020 in the amount of $343,400.11 prepared by Redpath and Company.
A second.
Manager Wynand, I'd second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, it'll be a roll call. Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Winan.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wageman.
Yes.
And Manager Preiner, yes. Motion passes. Okay, thank you. And we'll go to discussion on the district operations. Nick?
Yes, President Preiner, Board of Managers. As you well know, the Governor of Minnesota has issued any number of executive orders in regards to the current COVID-19 pandemic, some of which certainly apply to Rice Creek, and you've taken a number of different actions in regards to the pandemic and how you go about your business. I think there's been a fair amount of discussion in regards to opening up or what opening up looks like. Is that something the district would be doing, et cetera? In that the orders, the governor's orders are quite lengthy, some in the 40-page range and certainly filled with lots of detail. Smith Partners did provide a summary memo, which is in your packet at page 167, noting a couple of key points. The one that strikes me is that under Executive Order 2056 at the bottom of page 167 is that an employee from the district may work from the district office only if the employee cannot accomplish their work from home. So with that, I think it's important for me to share with the board that the productivity of the district office, I feel, is consistent with it was prior to the pandemic and our remote operations. I did talk to staff about this or query them for input and that sort of thing, which I can share with you. But maybe it's important to open it up first. If you have any concerns about this, I just wanted to have a open discussion or let you know the legal side of this as well.
Okay, comments from the board. Questions for Nick?
Crickets. President Preiner, if I could, I'll just advance that I think productivity of office staff is consistent. There was obviously a transition period. We're certainly reliant on all the good technology that is available to us today, and that allows for us to function as we do. You'll note that you've had some action by the board here, Rice Creek Board, defining the critical sector's work, and that obviously we have Teresa and Manager Waller in the office today, and that those staff doing critical work as we've defined it move in and out of the office and are to follow those good guidelines that the Department of Health has set in the CDC as well. So with that, I personally I don't have a recommendation to open the office, that we can continue to stay closed. I'm not really seeing a rush. I'm certainly would like to know if you have any parties, citizens, commissioners, other cities and such, which are concerned with us being closed. I think we're answering all, the phone lines and the mail that come in, all that is being addressed by staff. The only thing I'd note is I think all folks living under this condition, there is some anxiety, apprehension. If we were to open the office and ask folks to come on in, they would be a bit concerned about that. They're moving about their lives from the poll that I took. They're going to the grocery store with their masks or having things delivered and that sort of thing. I'll note that also that your consultants, Smith Partners, as well as Houston Engineering, are similarly situated, limited staff in the office and working under those appropriate measures for safety. So I'll leave it at that unless there's happy to answer any questions.
Madam President?
Go ahead.
Nick, just my own personal opinion, I think you're better prepared to be under this kind of condition for at least the next year. We have another winter season coming, and I've noticed in our area, the areas that are most infected are these meat preparation facilities, whether they're chickens, hogs, or cattle. And those are really big refrigerators, so people are working in cold weather, and when the cold weather comes back, that I could see that being a problem. So I would consider that you, in reference to history of the 1917, 18, 1919 epidemic, that was 3 years. And it can be very brutal. I know in my own, as others probably know from their own family history and mine. For example, I had a great grandfather who was 60 years old, lost his life to the flu in the spring of 1919, and an uncle who was in the army in France at the time who hadn't come home, who was about 28 and lost his life to that. So I suggest that even though the governor is opening things up and that there's abilities to make adjustments, that you consider this not to be something that's going to be done by Christmas. I think this year. I think maybe Christmas in a couple of years. That's just my comment and opinion.
Thank you, Manager Waller.
I did take a look at the Anoka County Board yesterday to see how they did it, and they don't even wear masks. They just separate 8 feet apart, 6 to 8 feet apart. So it's just a better conversation in a better gathering, but I guess it's up to the board, however you want to feel. I would feel I'd like to start to get open, but if everybody else doesn't, that's fine too.
Madam President, this is Bradley.
Madam President, this is Manager Wagaman. I'm pretty neutral on it. I could go either way.
So this is Bradley. My count is we have like 13, 15 people at this meeting. So we've got a problem there. Not supposed to meet with more than 10 people to begin with. And it would be hard to find a space. I know we've talked about using Hugo where we could separate out that many people.
Okay, I do
Madam
know
President?
that it does,
Madam-
it does say that it's, the limit is not subject to the limit of 10 people per persons or fewer.
Right.
But distancing, I'm just thinking about distancing.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Madam
Marcy.
President, this is Marcy. If we're talking about staff working at the office or not, having now being a manager that only knows about how this functions under COVID, I have appreciated response from staff when I needed it, and I've not heard any comments from any other unit of government about the staff not being able to respond to their requests. So on the staff side, Nick, I think keeping staff out of the office as much as possible is exactly where we want to be. I am actually surprised by so now if we're moving to public meetings, I'm surprised that on page 168, it states, as you said, President Steiner, that these public meetings are not subject to the limit on public gatherings of 10 persons or fewer. I will tell you, I will not attend a meeting with, I guess I would say, I'm not in a position where I can attend a public meeting where the amount of people that can show up are not limited. And
Well,
even
why don't we just agree to revisit it in the first meeting in July? Let's move out a little bit and take another look.
I would consider that.
I support that, yes. I think that's important to look at. And, you know, there's a lot of information here. Like I've listened to Dr. Osterstrom, who's the University of Minnesota top guy. And, you know, just on the subject of masks, he says the only one that really is a good one is that N95 from 3M, and none of us can get a hold of it now because all of it's going directly to the hospitals, obviously, and it's not available. So,
I have one, but then I'd have to meet by myself. That's
so,
not gonna work.
I'd relook at it in July. That's not too far away.
Yeah, we can take a look. Everybody's good with that?
Yeah, President Preiner, if.
Yep, I'm good with that.
Whoop.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, two things. Marcy, you're correct. There's two issues in play, right? One is the office being opened or closed, or what those conditions look like, and secondarily, how the board goes about its business of meeting and its capacity. And Smith Partners had written to that. So in a moment, I'd like to have Louis maybe make the distinction between the governor's orders and your own position that you take as a board. I suppose in recognition to some degree, or just observance, if you will, of that, you still have some authorities of your own that allow you to go about your business. So maybe that will be a good foundation for our future meeting in July. And if you would entertain whatever Louis has to share.
Sure. Louis?
Madam President, managers, I don't think I have a lot to add. I think the memo sets it out clearly. As to the board meetings, you could, if you wished, hold your meeting in public. That's been specifically exempted by the governor's order. But the next sentence in the governor's order is that remote meetings are strongly encouraged. And you have plenty of authority to continue these electronic meetings so long as the pandemic lasts. And as Manager Waller said, it could last quite a long time. I know from discussing the staff working remotely issues with Nick that you have really two elements to this. One is that the staff is performing well, working remotely, and achieving your productivity interests. And secondly, you have a dynamic open office situation there. If everyone were to return to work with the ventilation systems and the heating area, the office equipment use, you would need to go through a real re-engineering of your office systems, I think, and spaces in order to feel like you have prepared adequately for the safety of the employees. So I think for those reasons, it's good to continue as is with these measures. And the other point of the memo was to highlight that if you were going to return to work for the staff at the office, there's quite a bit of planning that's necessary. But if you're not planning to do that, why do the work right now?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to move on. Any other questions? Nick, you have your direction.
Madam President,
Go ahead.
like John Kolb might have a comment.
Oh, John.
Just briefly, and this is to follow up on Manager Winant's comment, and I'm sure that Lewis has seen this as well in his practice. We do have some public clients that have gone back to their in-person meetings, but they are having to accommodate the individual risk threshold decisions of both individual board members and of the public. So even if you were to go back to your in-person public meetings, you would still have to, I think, in fairness to the public's desire and entitlement to participate in your meetings, I still think you would have to make some accommodation for meeting those individuals' risk thresholds, especially if they are in a risk classification that would cause them hesitance to come to an in-person meeting. And I know that the board certainly wouldn't want to deprive anyone of the opportunity to participate, monitor, or otherwise attend your meetings based on their individual risk issues. So it's likely that even if you went back to in-person meetings, you may still have to provide, or you may still want to provide some form of remote attendance.
Madam President, Lewis, thank you for that, because I got like 3 of them. So it would be a major concern to me, and I'd have to consider whether or not I was going to have to resign. So.
Okay. Well, then we'll continue just reviewing it as we go until we feel that the safety is there for us and the public. Anything else? Administrator reports. Nick?
Yes, President Preiner, Board of Managers, a couple of updates from your administrator. I'll note that we entered into a computer server contract, or a contract for a new server at the office. That's about $18,000. I'm happy to report that we did budget for that. It came in a little bit higher than expected by about $3,000, but we think we'll clear the fund okay. The biggest issue with these is that all the detail in these computer programs and stuff continues to increase. So you need more and more space and speed to deal with that. So that's underway. I'll note that I did respond or follow up with Anoka County Commissioner Reinhardt. We had previously touched on a number of times communication from that meeting that we had with him and President Preiner and Manager Wagaman. We spoke a bit about the concerns of the meeting, that Rice Creek is doing what we can do under the processes, as the statutory items that we're held to, in trying to balance all the factors, from our various cities in interest. And we agreed to keep communication open, so I'll likely have an informal conversation with him in the future as well. And then the last item here, regulatory program costs came to in interest. Manager Waller did bring this up. There was interest in the 2019 Smith Partners, Houston Engineering, Rice Creek staff, and also our fees, which is fine. I certainly don't have any problem with responding, other than that the detail is likely to to have a level of effort here. Currently, for 2019, the costs at Houston Engineering are not split out between public and private. And so that would be a fair level of effort from Houston Engineering to do that. We have as I came on board here, they do now make that distinction. And it's important because with the public entities, you know, you don't capture a fee. So there would be really quite an exercise for you to say what percentage of a permitting cost is covered by the fee. So that's corrected for in the future, but not looking back. And I'm not quite sure how I would split out staff's time. You know, we run it at a program level, so any staff person's time on the front end is, you know, receiving a phone call or an email and, you know, responding to concerns about a puddle of water in their yard or what the neighbor is doing and all those kind of things that are important for our neighbors and so on and so forth. So difficult for me to break that out in a meaningful way, you know, as to what their cost would be for any specific permit. So I'm throwing it back to the board. Maybe Manager Waller would like to clarify any of that, or any of you that have an interest. I'm happy to provide it. If I knew the crux of how it might be used and stuff, maybe we can find some key information for you. When not, that's all up to you.
Okay. Manager Waller?
Well, what I was looking for was some kind of breakout cost for this, because it's kind of an issue of duplicate. You know, we had that brought up today by Mr. Staus from Centerville, talking about your duplication of issues here. And earlier, Manager Bradley had brought up about seeing about cutting costs, and he was talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollar areas. And since this is the regulatory program is about a $1.2 million budget, and I don't think we touched on it or worked on it very hard with the plan. When we were going through the plan, it was mentioned by Colb, and then we just kind of left it and we went on. It wasn't something we looked at. But under the current situation, and people are worried about the dollars coming in and costs going on, I thought maybe we'd start to see if there's a breakdown where we could start to save money if we're looking at rules C, D, E, and F. I mean, is it necessary for our staff to look at rules for if we're have a city that has the same rule? And we haven't done an inventory on that. Just for example, the stormwater program, we know that they just about all have stormwater plans now. There's only about 3 left. So is that an item that we need to have on our checklist, or do we need to make a checklist for all the entities that we work with that have a similar authority, and then maybe a duplication, and see if we can separate this out so that we don't spend time doing it. The phone call comes in, you know, you're in compliance. Look at the amount of time that's been spent on erosion control with the silt fences, you know, for example. So that's what I was trying to get at, to see if we could, where we could go. Maybe we need to make a checklist there. You know, does city A have a erosion control rule? Do they have a stormwater compliance plan? Do they have a floodplain adoption? Maybe these violations would be better handled by those cities, and we don't have to spend our time looking at a permit. I suspect that the one thing the cities don't have is the wetlands. You know, and that might be the only real thing that the permit needs to examine on this, you know, in these areas. Of course, there's that issue about water quantity and rate volume control and these permits, and maybe there we should take a look at how to judge that and put limits to a city's ability to provide it, because the stream only has so much of a capacity. You know, the ditches have a certain capacity, and that's what we're worried about. They're not exceeding those capacities. Maybe a different way to look at this.
John, this is Marcy, and
yes.
I like to used real-time examples about how this works. And since Tommy's Car Wash is just down the road from where I live.
Whoa, thank you for telling me where it is. I couldn't see that.
I got the memo from Marcus about them being not in compliant. That is just a very simple example maybe of did the city, and actually Tommy's Car Wash is right next to the city hall. So did the city look at it? Are we looking at it? How much time are we using? Maybe this is just a quick review of that particular permit to see how that could have been coordinated a little more, or if indeed Rice Creek needs to look at it and the city needs to look at it, and what does that do to budget?
I would like to ask this, Pat. I'd like to ask Lauren, did any of that information come through when they did their plans of what they actually are monitoring or anything like that that would help us have a direction for each city?
Manager Priner, Board of Managers, each city did provide some of their ordinances as part of the local water plan process. So I did review some of those and their SWIPs as well.
President Priner?
Go ahead.
Just to advance on the issue. I think I'm trying to identify the fundamental item here, and to me it's that there's two authorities over the landscape, right? The district has a regional authority, and so we set regulations as a single leg of your three-legged stool of accomplishing the district's goals, and blanket those across the district to accomplish those goals, right? So that's where the infiltration requirement to reduce volumes that go downstream, you're setting that standard across the entirety of the district so that you have a vehicle to accomplish the goal. MS4 does not have that. So that's one of the distinctions. And then certainly each one of our rules may have a nuance like that of what is different between our rules and what the minimums of the MS4 are. And then of course, you have two municipalities that said we would like only one authority on the landscape, Circle Pines and Hugo. And they have adopted their own ordinances that they're responsible for. And it's required that those meet those regional standards that you have set. The other rule that comes to mind immediately to me is your, help me out, Patrick and Chris. I'm thinking about the flood control issue in the southern part of the district. We have those property owners hold more water on the landscape to reduce the flooding at Long Lake. Yeah,
Flood management.
Yeah. So I'll leave it at that, just to throw it out to discussion. Certainly we can bring these back to the workshop and that sort of thing on the total rule revision.
Madam President, this is Bradley.
Yes.
John, instead of coming at this from a cost standpoint, I think we'd want to come at it from a functional standpoint. We have lots of areas where we work with other governments to jointly get the job done. We use the soil and water districts, for example, to do things for us. And there's the Joint Powers Act exists for the sole purpose of having two governments join together to cut cost. That's why it exists. So two of us do it independently, two of us do it together. And I see this as an opportunity to sit down as you're going through the rules that we've already tasked you to do that, to go through and look for duplication. Where are there areas where we would be better off agreeing, go to this individual city, offer all 26 cities. How many of you would like to be our enforcement arm on the water, the soil controls? And then enter into an agreement, say that you will be responsible for inspecting the properties that we give permits to. That sort of thing. That's what I would think we'd do instead of coming at it from cost standpoint, coming at it from a functional standpoint. And after we've had a year or so experience, maybe we'll see some reduced costs for us, which will show up in our budgets.
So, Madam President, I don't disagree with your functional approach, Mike, about that issue. But to say to the city, would you like us to do this, I think is the wrong way to frame that. I think it's more to say the city, this is your responsibility and you should do this. You must do this. It's not our wicket to come in here and pick up after you. You have this responsibility to do that. And then it gets into a question in which we haven't a function about, does the watershed district have supremacy in making its rule? So you make a more stringent rule in the watershed, and then the city has, and then it becomes a question of why is that necessary? Why hasn't the city made it a rule that's more important? If the city has a more stringent rule than the watershed district, for example, in erosion control, then we defer to the city's stringent rule, see? So it becomes a question of it appears to me that at times the watershed district is interested in enforcing or having a more stringent rule than maybe what the minimum is required when the city is the functionary. So I think that's kind of a, that gets to be a cost issue afterwards. Whether you approach it from a cost issue or a function issue, they kind of go together. I don't see how they separate them once, if you're going to perform the functions, there's going to be a cost there. And if we don't keep the costs accounted for, as to what does it cost us to put into Rule C, what does it put into Rule D, what is it E, and what is F in these permits? What are the additional outside of those are the water quality issues? What are for rate and volume control in order to make sure the system isn't overloaded? And so, I don't disagree with talking about the function, but I think the two of them are identical or coupled together. Thank you.
Okay.
President Preiner, if I
Yes,
could, and this is not in response to any one manager's comments or whatever. I think there's a let's see. I would have to rely on the communications from our inspectors where periodically we're concerned or not knowing where the city is at. So entering into any kind of agreement or situation with a city, I think we would have to develop a clear understanding of which entity is doing what, if it's a shared responsibility because we both have an obligation under the MS4, maybe, every other week we go out and we would like to see their reports that document us fulfilling our MS4, and we do the same back, and clear criteria about what's being covered. Right now, it's not apparent to what degree each individual city has in place for an inspection team.
Okay. So how do we want to proceed? So what you're saying really, Nick, is that you cannot separate it because it wasn't separated, but we'll know going forward because we can attribute the cost to different functions that we're doing. So, but as a board, I personally, I would like to pursue the issue, but we need to define what the issue is going to be. If our goal is to turn it all over to cities, that's one issue. If our goal is to keep our position, that's another issue. Or let's look at it and then decide. I don't think we need to, if the cities are taking that over, I don't know that we should go out and go over their head or look at what they've done, or unless there's a problem or a complaint. Otherwise, we're duplicating anyway, is what I'm saying. The effort.
Sure.
So I guess that's kind of how I'm thinking. Any other board members, please?
So I think we've already tasked staff to compare what we're doing, what they're doing to see where there's duplication. Once those are identified, we can identify those that they're better suited to do, such as where they have ability to deny a permit. And ones we're better suited because we have to determine both flow and water quality, and then see if there are people who want to join with us to remove duplication through a cooperative effort.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
Well, I would agree with Mike. I think there's some information that needs to be gathered. And we have the water plans. We've got the input from today's county city watershed meeting. If folks want to say something, we heard today from Centerville about this issue. We see this come up almost every meeting. So yes, we're stepping forward, and I don't think we're quite ready to go to the extent of breaking down the costs, etc. So it's all part of the rule revision, if I'm understanding this. So John, yes, we hear you, and yes, we know that there is some additional work that needs to be done, and getting there. That's okay.
So, Madam President,
Madam President,
Oh, wait, Steve, John.
Go ahead, Steve, go ahead.
go ahead, John. Okay, Madam President, I agree with what Marcy said. I think we are a little bit shy of making that decision. I would like to have a little bit more time to look at it myself also.
Do we want to have the staff prepare
That's it.
something and then set a special work meeting to just address this?
Oh,
Because it is a big issue.
so,
It's
It's an important issue, and I think we should do everything we can to make sure we don't step into something that's going to be hard to get out of.
so Madam President,
Yes, go ahead.
so I think we've been doing the first, approaching this. So Lauren's been working for about a year or so and been very successful in getting the cities to adopt their stormwater plans. That's it. That's one of these 4 issues that are involved here, stormwater plans. We haven't really taken a look at to see, for example, on maybe some of the other rules, how our rules and the cities match up or don't. Now, when the stormwater plans have come out, that's pretty close to being coordinated together. So I would suggest that we continue to, or start to look at how we can continue that function or process that we've done under stormwater plans with the other areas such as wetland alteration, floodplains, and erosion control. Those are the other 3 rules that are involved there. And then, well, once you have that checklist figured out, then you can talk to the cities as we have and decide what their rule differentiation is from the district rule. If there needs to be a different, that's the purpose of it. Or then you have a platform to be able to decide what's going to happen. I think that's the way we started this process. I'm just asking to expand it. And it'll give you a cost estimate of what goes on then. See, because if a guy comes in for a permit, he doesn't need to have 4 rules reviewed, then you don't have to worry about it. You just have to worry about developing a system to look at the cities in partnership to see what, as you do with Hugo or Circle Pines or some of the others, maybe and not necessarily with a formal agreement, but to work together and in the coordination.
Okay. Nick, any other comments? And then we'll move on.
President Pryor, Board of Managers, I would think we've set the ball in motion, that staff understands to lay out the distinctions between our MS4 requirements and the district rules. The board should obviously discuss where our regulations are more restrictive than MS4. If you see value in those additional restrictions in the outcome of the goals for the district, that in itself sets the standard for the entirety of the watershed district. Any of those changes must be adopted by those cities at currently Circle Pines and Hugo, who wish to administer as the sole authority and be responsible for those obligations. And then within that, once we know what those rules are, if there is duplication in the site visit, which is adherence to the rules for the erosion control and that sort of thing, there's certainly an opportunity to partner with any community that would want to. We just have a mutual understanding of what that looks like, a lot of detail there, and then execute.
Okay. Anything else on the issue? If not, we're going to go to staff reports. Anybody have a question on any of the staff reports today? If not, we'll go to June calendar.
Madam President, I see that John is scheduled to be the CAC. How are you going to handle that?
Hold on.
I'm gonna use a telephone
Good.
Okay.
when it's attached to the wall of my house.
Fantastic.
But I tell you, I do enjoy coming here and seeing all of you. It's a much better communication when we can each watch each other and feel it. Although it's not as good as I agree as being in the room, Madam President. I look forward to having our meetings together again also. But that's what I intend to do.
Okay, so we're covered on the calendar.
That is unless you're going to take it away from me again, Mike.
No. They don't need to see me 2 months in a row.
Well, I was wondering why did it,
Okay, any manager updates? Anything, John?
No.
Marcy?
Nope, we covered it. Thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Nope.
Steve? Any updates?
Nope.
Okay, and I have none, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, Madam President. Waller.
Bradley second.
Manager Wagaman, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Oh, let's see, we got a roll call. Manager Waller.
Yes.
Manager Wynant.
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Wagaman.
Yes.
And I say yes, let's adjourn and we'll see each other at 1 o'clock, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good
Thank you.
lunch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I know.
Bye-bye.